Monastery of Spilio Kalavrita. According to a lot of people, it is the oldest monastery of Greece and one of the most impressive Christian Orthodox pilgrimage. It is 10 kilometers out of the town of Kalavrita. It took its name, Spilio equals cave, from the cave where the icon of Virgin Mary was found. The history of the monastery. The monastery of Spilio was built in 362 AC by the brothers monks Simeon and Theodorus, who were from Thessaloniki. Each of them separately saw a vision, and they were both ordered to go from Jerusalem to Achaia and find the icon of Virgin Mary that was made of mastic and wax by Lucas the Evangelist. After wandering, the two brothers met a young shepherdess Euphrosine, who led them to the cave where the icon was. With great piety, the two monks took the icon out of the cave and cleaned this sacred place by removing the plants. When they burned the branches, a dragon jumped violently towards the exit of the cave and it was killed by thunderbolts. In order to keep this miracle alive, a lot of reconstructions have taken place. Also, the dragon's bones were kept until lately. Then, a lot of other pilgrims started to come to this region. Also, a lot of cells were built and gradually the monastery started to flourish and it became a center of orthodoxies and Hellenism through the centuries. It played an important role in the Greek Revolution of 1821 and it was an inexpugnable fortress for its conquerors. The brave heroic answer of its abbot, Damaskinos, in June 1827 to Ibrahim is known. "It is impossible for us to bow before you. If you come here to fight us and win, you won't do something bad because you will just beat priests. However, if you lose, you will be ashamed." And indeed, Ibrahim was defeated after an epic battle and the help of Virgin Mary.
December 1943, the Nazis plundered, burnt the monastery and killed 16 people, among the visitors, underlings and monks. They threw them down from a high rock. However, the monastery had already survived from 4 destroying conflagrations in 840, 1400, 1600, and in 1934. However, the icon of Virgin Mary remained intact. The icon of Panagia Megalospiliatissa, it is Apostle Luca's work. It is believed that it was given from Apostle Lucas to his spiritual son, the ruler of Achaia Theophilus, together with the Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles. Theophilos handed the icon down to his descendants. During the period of the persecutions, they hid it in the cave. When they died or gave their life for Christ, the icon remained in the cave until it was miraculously discovered by Saint Euphrosine. The icon is embossed and it is 3 centimeters thick. It is made of wax, mastic and other materials. On the icon you can see Virgin Mary sitting, while her head bends slightly on the right side. On her hand, she holds Christ who sits on her knees. In the monastery, there are important holy and national relics. There is a rare banner with 3 Byzantine emperors' figures on it, national costume, a valuable cross made of Holy Cross and Gospels and parchments. In a special chapel, there are a lot of icons, relinaries with lots of saints' relics and the heads of the founders of the monastery. The monastery celebrations on 15th of August, that is the feast day of the Dormition of the Virgin Mary. The region, the monastery of Spilio, makes people admire it as it built in the shade of a steep rock on Helmos mountain. It suits perfectly with the wild and impressive landscape of that region, as it is built at an elevation of 940 meters. The Cave of the Lakes in Kalavrita presents paleontological and biospeleological interest as the lower floor of the cave were found fossilized human bones and various animals including hippopotamus. Geology, morphology. The spacious and impressive natural entrance, 3.50 meters high and 6.50 meters wide, could not have gone unnoticed by passers-by. Should we add to this element its orientation to the east, we can easily understand why, at least the first chamber, has been used by man for such long periods, from prehistory to the historic times. The Cave of the Lakes, as it is now called, impresses the reader even with its very name. For the viewer, the impression is stronger and unforgettable. Lakes in the interior of a cave are neither common around the world, nor in Greece, where they constitute a unique geological phenomenon. Here the waters sometimes overflow in the winter and stagnate in the other seasons, in the 13 terraced lakes. Relatively recent floods are mentioned in the villagers' accounts for 1922 and 1940, as a result of torrential rainfalls. According to geologists, the cave has been partly opened within the Cretaceous limestones of the Tripolis geotectonic zone, and partly within the late Cretaceous thin-bedded limestones of the Pindos zone. It has been developed along a fault directed northwest, and its general morphology is similar. It is long and narrow, and has a comparatively very high roof. From the hydrological viewpoint, the cave may be separated in 4 parts, starting from its natural entrance, located 83 meters lower than the highest level of the cave. The first part is dry, almost 80 meters long, and its floor is horizontal, covered by a thick layer of red earth. The part where the excavations were carried out does not communicate with the rest of the cave, because of altitudinal differences caused by a fault. The second part is about 700 meters long. Its main feature is the successive lakes, created on the ground, through peculiar carbonic formations that prevent the continuous flow of the water. This part, which could be characterized as morphologically and hydrologically active, is also marked by its rich ceiling decoration of rocky formations. The third and largest part, which is over 1 kilometer long, has intense older and more recent precipitations, which, according to scientific studies, isolated it hydrologically from both the previous part of the lakes and from the next, small, 50-meter-long fourth part, where we encounter the basin's scours with the water collection once again. The water in the cave derives mostly from an intense flow of drops in periods of great rainfalls, but also, partly from the Aponocampos swallow hole, which is higher at a distance of 4 kilometers. Nevertheless, in the prehistoric periods, the waters that flew to the cave from the shallow hole were most probably changing direction from time to time, and this accounts for the long intervals when the cave was almost dry. The total length of the cave is nearly 2 kilometers and its shape may be recognized in the oblong, snake-like section of page 46. Prehistory and uses. The first findings that came to light were dated to the late Neolithic, the early, Middle and late Bronze Ages. The collection of ancient sherds, coming from an accidental trenching outside and a limited excavation inside, have produced the first examples of Neolithic and early Helladic pottery respectively. A few years later, in 1992–1994, the excavation of the Ephyraid of Paleoanthropology, Speleology, headed by Adamantios Sampson *, currently professor of prehistoric archaeology at the University of the Aegean, has brought to light anthropological and archaeological finds, which provide evidence that this cave was not only known to man, but also inhabited for long periods of time, with the first indications going back to the 6th millennium BC. The excavation in the Cave of the Lakes came quite late, compared to its exploration and touristic development. It was carried out in 3 stages, and although only a small part of the cave was tentatively explored, as it usually happens with cave excavations, the sections made at different levels on the inside, the entrance and the sides, gave sufficient information about the various phases of its habitation. The first findings that came to light were dated to the late Neolithic, the early, Middle and late Bronze Ages. More specialized studies have led to the conclusion that both the inside and the outside areas had been used more often in the period called Late Neolithic IB2, which extends from the middle to the end of the 5th millennium BC, with a main phase dated to circa 4300 BC and a continuous use for almost 300 to 400 years. But even much later, until the Late Bronze Age, circa 1100 BC, there was a multiple use of the area, particularly near the natural entrance and the first hall of the cave, which had always been more accessible and where there is more light. In the Cave of the Lakes, after the first 80 meters, which is the length of the first part, it becomes difficult to move forward. This was also the case in ancient times, because a vertical rock rises up at this point. The second and third part of the cave with the rocky basins follow. In periods of rainfall, the water from the lake fell, in the guise of a waterfall, and inundated the first hall. Such flood episodes were recognized during the excavation. These are layers of clay, lacking man-made archaeological material, in contrast to what happens in the other layers, which produced settlement floors, with hearths, ash and carbon, small constructions made of dry stone walls, parts of a pottery kiln, fragments of vases, stone and bone tools, clay spools, a stone ornament, loom weights, animal bones, and an important anthropological find of primary or secondary, i.e. set-aside burials of nearly 13 people. The clay vases were for everyday use and present a great variety of shapes. In the late Neolithic period mentioned earlier, as many as 30 different types of vases, both small and large, were identified for the preparation of food and the storage of products. It is not easy to determine from the finds whether the cave had been used for habitation rather than storage. Nevertheless, it was observed that the greatest percentage of large closed vases come from the interior of the cave. In contrast, the small utilitarian open ones come from the outer sections. In the light of this, it is quite plausible that the storage should have taken place inside and the preparation of the food outside the cave, depending on the weather. The temporary inhabitants of the cave must have been breeders of goats, pigs and a few bovines. Their diet would have been supplemented with the hunt, since we know that deer and hare were common in the Aronia Mountains. Furthermore, the members of this distant community were undoubtedly engaged in the usual domestic occupations, such as the grinding of seeds, the treatment of skin, wood, stone and wool. For these they used grinding tools, hand axes and obsidian or flint flakes. Precious jewels, decorated vases or important objects were not found in situ, and this may indicate that this community was rather poor. We may conclude that the cave had been the nucleus of a small Neolithic community, with a farming and animal breeding settlement that had been installed around its entrance, and at times in its interior, taking advantage of what a cavity could offer, mainly protection from the weather conditions. In the early Helladic period human activity was greatly reduced, and the cave's use became much more infrequent and sporadic, while any permanent or seasonal long-term habitation should be precluded. Kalavrita massacre. In early December 1943, the German Army's 117th Jaeger Division began a mission named Unternehmen Kalavrita, Operation Kalavrita, intending to encircle Greek resistance guerrilla fighters in the mountainous area surrounding Kalavrita. During the operation, 78 German soldiers, who had been taken prisoner by the guerrillas in October, were executed by their captors. In response, the commander of the German division, General Karl von Lesueur, personally ordered the severest measures, the killing of the male population of Kalavrita, on the 10th of December 1943. Operation Kalavrita was mounted from 6 cities, Patras, Aegion, and Corinth on the Gulf of Corinth, and from Argos, Pyrgos and Tripolis in central Peloponnese. All battle groups were aimed at Kalavrita, although the divisions from Pyrgos, Argos, and Corinth returned to their bases soon after. Wehrmacht troops burnt villages and monasteries and shot civilians on their way. The Germans reached Kalavrita on December 9. In the early morning of December 13, 1943, the Germans rounded up all residents of the town and forced them into the school building, where they separated the older boys and men from the women and children. They moved the men to a field owned by Thanasis Capes, a school teacher, just overlooking the town. After looting the town and setting it ablaze, the Germans machine-gunned the men. 438 men, boys and seniors were killed. There were only 13 male survivors, saved because they were hidden under the bodies of the dead. Austrian soldiers were part of the contingent. The next call of order was to lock rounded up women and children into a primary school. After doing so, the Germans set the school on fire. Luckily, they found a way to escape the school that was already on fire. According to some accounts, an Austrian soldier left accidentally a door of the school unlocked, thereby allowing the women and children to escape. The following day the German troops burned down the Achaia Lavra Monastery, a landmark of the Greek War of Independence. In total, 693 civilians were killed during the reprisals of Operation Kalavrita. Actual memorials in Kalavrita and other villages name every one. 28 communities, towns, villages, monasteries and settlements were destroyed. In Kalavrita itself about 1,000 houses were looted and burned, and more than 2,000 livestock seized by the Germans. Today the place of sacrifice is kept as a memorial site, and the events are commemorated every December. On the 18th of April 2000, then President of the Federal Republic of Germany, Johannes Rau, visited Kalavrita and expressed shame and sorrow for the tragedy.